A Tiny Revolution features adults having adult conversations, which means that adult language is probably going to be present, just so you know. Hello, you're listening to A Tiny Revolution, a podcast about ordinary people living revolutionary lives. Welcome to episode 54. My name is Kevin Garcia, and I hope you're having a great morning, afternoon, evening, whenever you're listening to this podcast. You are in for a fantastic conversation today. As per usual, at least I think they're fantastic. Before I jump into the conversation, just a couple quick announcements. One, I'm going to be in Greenville, North Carolina this weekend with the Reformation Project for Elevating the Dialogue, an event featuring a panel of pastors, both from all different kinds of theological backgrounds. So we have folks who are non-affirming, we have people who are completely affirming, and we have people who are kind of in like a third way situation, so to speak. And the conversation is basically to humanize everybody in this conversation so that we don't see each other as these big, horrible, nebulous kind of entities, but rather really humanize us to say, oh, we really do have something to learn from one another. And more than that, it's actually to get a whole bunch of conservative people in a room and actually interact with affirming Christians and LGBTQ Christians for the first time probably, which is huge for so many folks living in the South. So if you're in Greenville, North Carolina, come out. It's this coming Sunday. All the information can be found on Facebook. Just look up Elevating the Dialogue and it should pop up as an event. The event is free, but you do need to get registered, so check that out, and I'll see you in North Carolina this weekend. This week I'm talking with Tina Alexis Allen. Tina is a GLAAD Award-nominated actress, producer, scriptwriter, and playwright. Allen is a cast member of the TV series Outsiders on WGN America, and also co-starred in feature films Moving Mountains and Taurus Dilemma, as well as the web series Looking for Kathleen. In this conversation, Tina and I dive into so many things, including and mostly surrounding her new book that's come out recently called Hiding Out, a memoir of drugs, deception, and double lives. Y'all, it is so good. So many people have said it's a page-turner, and I can echo that sentiment. It is so good. Our conversation ranges everything from her childhood to growing up religious in a very conservative Catholic home, to what spirituality looks like now, to even what it feels like to have a parent move on to the next life, and what it is to kind of feel them still around us. So it's beautiful, and I really enjoyed this conversation. I know that you will too. So go ahead, grab yourself some coffee, or maybe something that you love to drink anyways. Grab yourself a friend, sit down, listen to my conversation with my friend Tina Alexis Allen.
So I'm an actress first, a writer, a playwright, an activist. I have a socially conscious jewelry brand, which we may not have time to get into today, but it's basically in the territory of gun violence and stopping the madness. So, yeah, I was on Outsiders, a TV show for 2 seasons that ended in the spring. And then I've just written my first memoir, my first book, Hiding Out, a memoir of drugs, deception, and double lives with HarperCollins. And basically, I kind of am bouncing between writing and acting now. My writing career seems to have taken off the last 3 years. So I'm also writing screenplays and deep in work with some producer-writer teams. And yeah, my life is incredibly full and blessed. And forward, gosh, that's a good question. I always love to do things that I haven't done before. I guess it's why I've had such a varied career, from MBA to executive to actor to writer to author, blah, blah, blah. It's because I like challenge. So I'm not sure what lies ahead. Maybe a little bit of directing, and I'd like to turn Hiding Out into a television series. So I think that's numero uno, and of course more books, writing more books.
Yeah, when you said turning Hiding Out into a TV series, my eyebrows shot all the way up.
Glad to hear.
Because that sounds thrilling.
Yeah.
And also it's like so terrifying to like use your own life as material for such a big creative endeavor like that.
It is until it's not. I think Interestingly, one of the reasons I wrote this book is so that I hope people who read it aren't so terrified of their own lives, specifically their own secrets or things they might be shameful of, because I have been working with my life story in many different ways. I've done 2 solo shows over the years that I've written and performed, playing various members of my family. I did one playing my dad off Broadway a few years back, and exploring his life, playing a man, which was an incredible experience and challenge. And so holding my story to write this book wasn't really that heavy. Not to say that I, didn't have moments or, might have things that come back that sort of like, oh, it feels like a weight on you. But I think that the longer, the longer we spend exploring our story and not interpreting it so much as good or bad, the easier it is to put it into the world. And I think then there's the chance to help other people, because then they see, gosh, my life isn't quite as crazy as I thought it was, or maybe I don't have to be ashamed of that, or maybe I can apologize or receive the apology.
Yeah, the thing you just said that kind of stood out to me was looking at your story and not kind of, you didn't say this exactly, but not judging it as either good or bad. And I think you touched on this in Matthias's podcast too, about especially when you were playing your dad through your solo show, about how you didn't view it as neither good or bad. It just kind of was what it was.
Yeah, my sister has this expression she's been saying to me for the past month since I've been on this book tour, and she goes, it's true, Tina. It's just rain. It happened. It happens, and when we can just see it for what it is and not judge it and be of it. I think that takes time. Don't get me wrong. I don't think people go through traumatic events in their life and it's not just, oh, it happened, I'm done. You have to spend some time with it. But having done that for many, 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 many years, the book actually, or the idea of a TV series, isn't threatening to me in any way. I don't feel shame or blame or judgment. So it's much easier to, stretch it out like a piece of putty in this way or that way, and not be blown around by it.
Yeah. I think that when many creatives at least started off in their life, I know, so when I was like 21, I was trying to be real ambitious and kind of like write a memoir, and then I'm now it's like nearing the end of my 20s, and I'm just like, what was I thinking? Trying to write about what I was like, what the fuck did I know, please?
Yeah.
But it was so interesting. Like I still have all those writings, but looking back on it now and seeing like how I wrote from a very different perspective than I am now. Since like writing your book and like writing these different plays around your family and your experiences with dealing with not only just the story of your father being a very devout Catholic man, someone who you've referred to as like a very holy man, like who is in touch with like Vatican officials and things like that. Which still like kind of blows my mind that anyone has access like that.
Yeah, I'm still trying to uncover all the details, but certainly in the book, without giving spoilers away, I do explore and discover a lot of very strange dealings with Vatican and other church officials that seem kind of Dan Brown-esque.
Yeah. Which is like also like that series. Like when I was really young, I was told that I was not allowed to read the Vinci Code. I'm so serious. Like my family is super Southern and conservative, so it was just like, you want to talk about like question anything, can't watch that movie.
Is your family Catholic, or what religion are they? Or are they just conservative in general?
Conservative evangelical Christians, but it's like anything that sort of like questions like the divinity of Christ, or kind of like pokes at the narrative that we've been handed was a threat. And so thus we were unable to like, it was like also things like Harry Potter. We weren't allowed to read Harry Potter for a long time either, because it was like witchcraft, y'all.
Witchcraft. It was, all of that. I just want to make sure, are you hearing me okay? I have a little bit of banging in the back because they're renovating our hallways. So
you sound great. You sound
to
fine.
New York. Yeah. Are you okay?
Yeah, everything sounds fine. Don't you worry.
Oh, beautiful.
So knowing that y'all did. That's such good grammar.
Y'all. I'm
Y'all,
from Maryland, so I sometimes say Maryland or y'all, or yeah, it slips out occasionally too.
anytime I'm around my family, my southern accent comes out so hard.
Yeah.
But y'all grew up in a very very conservative Catholic home,
Yes.
and I think the thing, like even before I opened your book, reading the back cover on where it just had the excerpt from the book, where you're standing at the top of the stairs and your father's greeting you and your partner at the time, and he just kind of just like comes out to you like then and there. Like, what was that experience like of having your dad being so nonchalant about it?
Well, interestingly, he was so loving and compassionate, and that wasn't really the man that was generally showing up at home. You know, he was actually pretty tough and sometimes mean, as I describe in the book, to us and my mother particularly. So the fact that he was even being so gentle and loving around the discovery or his assumption that I was with my partner, which I was, she was there at the dinner, was mind-blowing because, one, I was completely in the closet. I was living in Chevy Chase, Maryland, had gone to Catholic school all my life. I was not out in any way. And it was scary, not in my family, but also in my community. It was always, it was the 80s, so it was a different time.
Yeah.
And so when he first of all outed me, that was incredibly shaky, and I can feel now just sort of remembering the terror of now what? Now what's going to come? My family's going to know. How am I going to be treated? Am I going to be ostracized? What's going to happen? But really I was scared of him. And then of course, and this isn't a spoiler because it's on the back cover of my book, and frankly, it's only chapter 3. It's the tip of the iceberg, what I'm really about to say, which is then he, of course, took our hands and revealed that he too was gay. He too had male lovers. He had a lover before my mother and was active, I came to learn, still with men. So that was beyond mind-blowing. The first round was, a bit of a knockout punch, and I don't really know what the other was. It was from some other planet. I was flabbergasted in every way, shape, and form, and yet it totally turned my relationship with my dad 360 degrees. I didn't have a relationship. So in a way, on the surface, you could look at it as, wow, that's super heavy, which is one way to look at it, and not necessarily untrue. But the other piece of it is that it was also loving and an opening both for him and for me to have more breath in our lives and to have somebody accept us for who we were inside our own family. So it for sure is bittersweet, the big picture, but there's a lot of love and compassion and beauty in the craziness, which is kind of like life, isn't it?
Yeah. Like hearing, like reading that portion, I felt so much of like my own self in it. When I was like 16, my father and I wasn't even 16. I think I was like 15 or something. I was a sophomore in high school, and my dad and I got into this fight because I was, in theater like every other, little gay boy in high school. And I was talking to him about like going to college to study theater, and he got real defensive and kind of said, "Kevin, it's not." And I told him, I said, well, this is what is going to make me happy, I think. This is where I feel most alive. And he said, Kevin, it's not about you being happy. It's about you being employable. And he went on this like tirade about how all the guys in theater were homosexuals, and that a bunch of other mean things. And at that point, like I just shut down. And I was like, I cannot believe I'm talking about this right now. And I was super closeted, went up to my room, and later on that day, like I just stayed up in my room, like working on whatever I was working on. And he comes up to the room and says, hey, I'm sorry for how I was talking to you. And that was like the only time in my dad's life, God rest his soul, that he ever apologized that I remember.
Wow.
And then he proceeded to like drill down with a series of questions. And rather than like kind of like the loving approach, like he just kept asking, like, do you have a problem with sex? I'm like, I mean, maybe kind of. And he's like, well, Kevin, are you gay? And I'm like, kinda. Because that was like the only words I had was just It's just very interesting how I feel like in some ways, like when somebody else kind of like peers through your glass closet, so to speak, and tells you like what's going on there, like it was almost like I knew that I wasn't ready to like tackle the question of what this could mean, because all those same questions you just named of like, what next? Who, like, what is my family gonna do? Am I gonna be ostracized? And that's so scary, and that happens all the time still, like where I don't know.
It's amazing how much it still does happen. I did an interview with Teen Vogue, which will be out fairly soon.
Dope.
I was loving the conversation we were having the interviewer and myself, because it really was about, advice for young people who do feel that they've come out, they're having great challenges, or have to the extreme been ostracized from their family. They're not speaking. And, one of the things that struck me is that where I was or where I eventually got to, specifically with my mom, who was maybe drilled down in her own gentle way, but did drill down with me and didn't approve of my choice. And, from her religious standpoint as a devout Catholic, it was basically a sin.
Yeah.
So, I'm sure she thought I was going to hell. So assuming she really did believe that there was hell and that one is going to end up there, how could I judge her for worrying about me? When we actually get underneath it and stop being defensive, and it doesn't mean that they're right or we're right, or they're wrong and we're wrong. It just means that we really often, not always, have a completely different take on what's right or wrong. And so I feel like, and what I said to this interviewer about sort of specifically teens is, she was saying, well, what can they do? I mean, I think it's absolutely essential that all of us at any age in this situation find our tribe. We have to find the people who love us for exactly who we are. Yeah. That's the first thing. It may not be your family, but once we find that and we get our legs back and we get our strength and we own our voice and we stand for who we are, it's easier to go back into the family, because then you start to realize those kind of things like, oh, well, actually, in a way, my mother probably really was authentically worried, like burn in hell.
Yeah, that's kind of a big thing to worry about.
Yeah. So if she really believes that, and that's her fundamental belief, then her judgment of me, or her worry of me, makes sense to her. I don't believe in hell, and I don't think anyone's burning in hell.
Same.
I think the burning might happen on earth when you don't own who you are.
Come
that
on.
might feel like hell. However, because I don't come from that space, it's impossible for me to go, you're judging me because why? But that's what growing up is. That's part of our responsibility, is to start holding our families, and specifically our parents, just as human beings, just as people, as your boss who has an opinion, as your neighbor who has an opinion. They are just people. And yes, it hurts more in the beginning, but in the end, if you can get to that place of just seeing people as human beings, including family, it's a lot easier.
Yeah. I actually, I had to, like, oh my gosh, sorry. Like, I'm having like all of these moments, like full disclosure, like my dad died like last month. And so
sorry.
Me too. But as I've been working through, actually, no, sorry, it was February. Wow. Time is, when you're going through grief, I feel like time kind of collapses, like folds in on itself. And it's like, it feels like the longest and fastest thing ever.
It's so true.
It's so strange. But the thing that you said about viewing our parents from like kind of like treating our parents like people rather than as like our parents, because like, I think there is like a shift from when they're going from this role of you are my parental figure, you are the person who I'm looking to for advice and wisdom and all these other things, to like, oh, you're also a human in the world who is dealing with this, like a lot of like being human in the world.
Yeah.
And because you are someone who's a human being, a human in the world, you're making choices and you're dealing with struggles and you have your own traumas that caused you to do X, Y, and Z. And so it's like when I can look at the memory of my father from that perspective and like the things he went through with like not having a great childhood and, you know, being a special forces veteran and all like the crazy shit he had to do when he was a part of the various wars he was in. It's like, it's no wonder you did X, Y, and Z because you were never given the tools to properly function in a family system, because the only thing you've ever known is like secrets and self-preservation.
Yeah, exactly. It's I think it's part of our responsibility as human beings that we do exactly that, you know, step into that space of, you know, evolving from looking at our parents as the people with all the power to, you know, leveling the playing field. And what you just said is exactly how one does it. You start to, you know, get a little less self-involved, which comes with age, to see that other people have their cross to bear, if you will, as well as we do. So I don't know if I suffered more or less. It doesn't really matter, but I know that other people suffered. You know, other people in my family suffered. My parents had their suffering. They did the best they could. And it is a bit of a cliche to say that, but I think when you can really believe that, life changes.
Yeah. It's this kind of, I think it's an act of self-compassion, and by extending compassion to others, you also extend compassion to yourself. Like, it's very interesting for me because I'll often note, like in like my own therapy sessions, as I'm talking through my own, you know, family stuff, that I can hold like these tensions of my dad was not the greatest human in the world, and at the same time, my dad was also just as messed up, you know, probably even more messed up in some ways than I was. So if I can view him through this kind of like higher level lens, and I think if you want to like take that same thing and apply it to, you know, spiritual systems or institutional church systems where we have all of these people who are doing the most and the worst to LGBTQ people, I think the thing that sustains a lot of my work, at least, is being able to look at these individuals and say, yeah, from your perspective, kind of like how you're saying with your mother, you genuinely believe that like this is something sinful and like punishable by hell, fire, and damnation. So of course, when you like live in the spirit of being fearful of everything, you're going to like take certain actions to mitigate that fear. And so as people, you know, kind of I don't want to say at a higher plane of spiritual understanding, or just at least like we've like walked through things that have led us to different conclusions. When we can place ourselves in the shoes of another person, it's like, it allows me to be less angry with them. It's like, oh, well, of course you would think that way because you haven't been shown anything different. Yeah.
When I played my father off Broadway, speaking of walking in someone else's shoes, one of the reasons that I did that is, in hindsight, you know, he had passed a couple years before, and my relationship with him is so highly unusual and unique and complicated, and sexy and crazy and everything else that's there in the book. But I wanted to understand him better. I never quite understood, you know, because I was always a little afraid of him, even when we got really close and hung out a lot. I never really pushed for the tough questions. You know, I never pushed him to answer, I think, out of that fear. And when he passed, I think after a couple years, there was a part of me that really longed to understand how he compartmentalized all that, how he justified, because I believe he was really authentically faith-based and seeking, and he did a lot of things that were absolutely good in the world. Other people, poor, sick, handicapped. He was very involved in all of those kinds of causes and generous beyond. But I didn't understand how he could consolidate a church, devoting himself to a church, to an institution that basically would have rejected him and kicked him out had they known the full story.
Yeah.
So walking in his shoes, part of that was to understand, and then also understand the man who came home and was really not a very nice person at home, like what was going on. And the one thing I walked away from that surprised me, I remember being in a rehearsal and exploring something, and after I was done, it was like a lightning bolt went off, and I said to myself, he didn't want to be that way. Like I actually got it from an internal space as him, that he struggled, that he didn't want to be that. Because as a kid, if your parent is a certain way, you just assume that's just them. You're not thinking through, boy, they're probably up in their room feeling bad right now.
Yeah, right.
You know what I mean? You're just like, they're an asshole.
Yeah.
Say that. I just did. But what I got from walking in his shoes was some really fundamental awakenings about who I think he actually was. And I knew him pretty well. But having played him, I stopped compartmentalizing him in death the way that he had to compartmentalize himself in life. Oh, wow. And that's something I know some of my siblings wish I weren't doing, but I refuse to sort of leave him in this compartmentalized state or legacy. And I think that was part of doing the show too. And I'm thinking about your dad and who he is and your own journey, and wondering what and how you'll change his legacy by being fully who you are.
I'm not getting teary-eyed right now. You're getting teary-eyed. Holy shit. I wasn't expecting to get ministered to on a Tuesday morning.
It's a big time. Losing a parent is a huge transition, and I do feel for you. I know how it is having lost both my parents. I know that space. It's very tender.
Yeah, it feels so strange. I wasn't very close with him. That was the other thing that was very strange too, is to go from, being, I hadn't talked to him in 2.5 years, hadn't seen him in 3. And the day that I was like flying up to see him, when he went into hospice care, was actually the day that he passed. And it was this feeling of, I don't know. It was a feeling of, I feel so horrible because I'm not going to get to say the things I need to say right now. But it was also this feeling of, okay, almost like the question of just like, okay, like, who am I going to become now? Because the entire week leading up to me traveling up there, I had done a lot of like internal work of like just attempting to release forgiveness over all of the things that I was angry about, and kind of like having this conclusion when I was actually in a yoga class and having, the most spiritual experience ever in a yoga class. And I just hear this voice from me, and I would say it's the Holy Ghost, if you will. And the Spirit just said, like, the best parts of your dad are living in you, and the best parts of your dad are the things you have yet to discover.
Wow.
And
yeah. That's beautiful. It's really incredible. I think people live forever in us, because I do think that they are in our hearts. So it's sort of like, if somebody's in your heart, then maybe it is true that they last forever. It's, I don't know. It's, my mother assured me before she passed that she would always be in my heart. And that's true. So in a way, they never leave us.
Yeah.
And it's up to us to keep it active, right? It's up to us.
Do you ever have Do you ever have any moments like throughout your day? And this is kind of me being like a little ooky spooky maybe, but I
Uh-huh.
have these moments where like I just come into awareness that like my dad is like his spirit is like somewhere around me in the room.
Yeah, I definitely have felt him. I mean, certainly playing him, I felt like I was him. So I felt like, I really felt transformed during that process. I would feel so much of him, like I got out of the way and just let him move through me. So I do know what you mean. And I think, that was a more intense time, of course, a more regular time of that. But yes, I do very much still hear him, and feel that I actually have a sister who has a friend in Boston, and she went to this, I guess, psychic, if you will, who actually sees a few people at a time. So I guess it's like a small group of people. That's her way. Anyway, the point is that my sister had seen this old friend in Boston. It was a couple months back, and some of my family was having a hard time with my being so public. Now, I've been public before, which they've had a hard time with, but obviously a book is different than an off-Broadway show. It's the potential to reach, millions on Megyn Kelly, which I was on, versus 200 seats. So the point is that my sister was telling her friend in Boston about some of the family having, struggles with this. And she listened and was whatever, supportive. Then she goes to this psychic, like within a week or less. And in the room, the psychic was saying, I'm feeling this large family. And so for your listeners who this may not have come up yet, I'm the youngest of 13.
Whoa.
Yeah. So it's a big number. And anyway, so the psychic was like, well, there's, it's a big family, and nobody in the room was responding. No one had a big family. Nobody was, extended family was that big. So no one was really responding. So she kept going on, and a few more things. And then she said, there's a man, he's not with us anymore. And he wants the family to know that it's okay, that it's okay. And then a couple beats later, she said, still no one was responding. And then she said, is there a Cath? Cath, so short for Catherine or Kathy. No one calls my sister Kath except us, And besides, how many people are Kath? You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Is it Catherine or Kathy? So the woman literally said Kath, and my friend said, "Oh, well, I have a friend who I just saw last week in a really big family." And so clearly my dad was, in my opinion, it's too crazy and coincidental. Those that don't believe don't have to, but I mean, come on, Kath and a big family, and somebody, she had just talked about this. So, I mean, in my own ways, I think people and spirits and people speak to us, and I'm sure your dad is still speaking to you and will continue to speak to you.
Yeah, I think so. I think growing up in conservative Christian land, I would have never been open to something like that before. Yeah. But I have a few friends who've like kind of encouraged me, and was like, if you feel like it's real, like what if it is? And even if it's not, does it help you sleep better at night? Does it make you move through the world with more intention? Good. Yes.
Yeah.
And I think that's the thing with like going from like a very small, because I still very much identify as a Christian. I still attend a church as weekly as possible, which is a super progressive and inclusive congregation. But my faith has evolved into something so much bigger than just simply like people just like, like being a Christian is the only way. I'm just like, sure. And also, I've experienced God in all of these other spaces with all of these other people and through people of other faith traditions.
Yeah. It's a beautiful thing. You're right. And your friends are right too. It's sort of the bottom line is, if it's working for you and your heart is open, then I say, who cares what it is? If it's yoga or Sunday mass or, chanting, with Sufis, on a mountain. It's like the point is that is it making you a better human being, and are you more compassionate, and are you more loving? I mean, that is what I think we're all striving for and hoping more of in our world. I always have issue when obviously somebody decides that their way is the only way. That's where I get a little jammed up, because I just say to myself, if or to them, if you can look up at the sky and explain it all to me, I will then believe your version. But
Yes.
but unless you can, please don't tell me or anyone else that your way is the only way, and that you're the only people who will be saved or honored or allowed through some gates. I mean, it's absurd, as if one group of people has the answer. There's a million, billion, trillion ways to do it. And I think what you're describing is exactly how I feel about it. Is there are so many ways to be a wonderful, loving, compassionate human being, and you have to find it for yourself.
Yeah, and there's so many ways to be connected to God or the divine, or whatever
Yes.
word you want to use for that. And I think, if I didn't go to that yoga class the day that my father went into hospice care, I would have not had that revelation that my father would still be with me even after death. If
Right.
if I didn't, go around the world and stand on a mountaintop in Nepal and watch the sunrise, I would have never actually appreciated, God in nature. I think.
Yeah.
It's all
exactly.
it's the different places where God's not lurking in four walls on a Sunday morning. God is sneaking around in the least likely person that you're going to encounter on the street, and if you don't have your eyes open to it, you're missing out on some of the greatest treasures that the world wants to offer you.
It's so true. And I have a niece who's gay, and it reminds me of a story she told me recently. That when she came out to my parents, she kind of had a similar experience I did, which I didn't really know the details of it. She's lived out of town. We weren't in the same town. So I was off to New York by the time she was sort of coming of age. So I didn't know her life well. But the point is that I remember her sharing with me recently that my dad was incredibly loving and gentle. And it's just interesting and then my mother was having, the harder time. And on the surface, if you were to have met my parents, you would say, oh, your mother's so gentle and sweet and kind and soft-spoken and loving and thoughtful. And if you had met my dad, you'd be like, God, he's so uptight. He's angry. He's a workaholic, he's edgy, he drinks too much, and yet people are everything, So for me, it's sort of like what you see on the surface is not always what you get. And we have to be, as human beings, as you said, very, very mindful and present to make sure we don't miss what's walking down the street, to not miss what we're asking for. Because so many times, I'm sure you've experienced this too, and I've experienced it and have to laugh at myself as an artist, it's like I'm asking for something, I'm praying for something, and I'm, just engaged so passionately asking for what I want, and it's been there the whole time. What's the solution? It's right next to me, but I'm so busy, in my own spin, that I miss it. And I think spirituality is the same way. When you get so locked into something having to be answered in this form, I don't think you have as much chance as all the miracles that just keep showing up every moment,
Ooh. Did y'all know Tina Alexis Allen was a pastor? Did you know? Because she can preach.
Not intentionally, but
thank
you.
That's the thing. It's just we're never intentional, but when you're speaking a powerful truth and it just makes your whole body shake a little bit, I'm just and I come from a little bit of a Pentecostal background too, so we shout a little bit when the pastor's doing real good.
I like it. I would probably really enjoy that. I like that sort of soulful clapping, shouting, my friends tease me. It's like, yeah, it's all good. I love that sort of passionate, soulful way of being.
Hmm.
And
It's more fun. I feel like people get so tied up in things
yeah,
that are. I mean, like Western culture teaches us anyway. It's just like keep your emotions to yourself. Don't get too excited and don't get too sad. Just kind of live somewhere in the middle. And I am like, if I can't live between both extremes, like, like there's like the thing like I'm working on right now is like holding my sadness that I've been carrying for the past few months, and at the same time acknowledging that even though I'm sad, there's so many good things that are happening.
yeah,
And I
yeah,
think that people have trouble holding on to the tension of this in between, and like maybe, and not just of like good and bad happening at the same time, but also kind of this duality, or like this like nebulous mix of lovely and broken that we all kind of carry around at the same time. And
yeah, yeah. Including it, right? Including
yeah,
everything.
Richard Rohr would say everything belongs.
Yeah,
Um,
I love him. He gave my book a endorsement, if you will. I'll send it to you. And he basically, I'd have to paraphrase or pull it up, but basically he said that the journey of merging the lightness and the dark is necessary, that
mm,
we have to explore both. The shadow he talks a lot about, and he talks about my book, because of course there's a lot of shadow in my book. There's a lot of sex and outrageous behavior, but there's also the light, and there's true faith and spirituality that's sort of trying to get through, as sort of a foundation in my home and a foundation of my father, and the Vatican element that crops up. So it's like the shadow needs the light, but the light
mm,
needs the shadow too.
yeah.
And we need to embrace that. But yeah, he was a big fan of my book, and you know, I can think he used the word transformational agent in terms
Mm,
of the book, and I think
yeah.
that's a key point, is that anything that we hold in such a dark space, we're going to be victims of until
Mm.
we put the light on it and transform it.
Yeah. 100. Yeah. The word, like I would second all of those emotions.
Yeah,
That
yeah,
the word transformational, I think, is like not just apropos, but just like spot on, because
yeah,
I think even as you're writing in your book, and you kind of mentioned this in Matthias's podcast too, like you were writing from your younger voice of not
yes,
trying to explain anything, but just putting readers in the moment. And like as I was going through it, that was the thing I felt the entire time was I'm like, she's not trying to explain this experience. She's just sharing this experience and letting it resonate with me however I need to receive it.
yeah. I always say, I hope the book is a mirror, even though it's a
Mm,
very specific, wild, audacious story. And it is a page turner. I kind of get that.
seriously.
Yeah,
Seriously.
yeah, I do. I've been getting that feedback literally, like, 90 to 95% of the time. Every review and every email and Instagram, reach out I get is all about, like, I couldn't put it down, or some version of that, read it in a day. The point is that's all there for a reason. Yes, it's a wild ride. It's a roller coaster you're going to get on. But I always, my wish is always that people ultimately, when they put it down or as they're going through, find the mirror in it, and people are, and that's what I love about it, is, and that's why I chose not to narrate it, not to tell you how you should feel or why she did what she did,
Hmm.
at 18, 19, 20. I figured if you get on the roller coaster, you're going to have the experience, and you're going to have your own thoughts watching her, and then you'll have your own thoughts about you and your life,
Hmm.
and where you may still be hiding or feeling shame, or where you're not resolved with family, or need forgiveness, or need to need to forgive someone else.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I'm glad that that's how you received it. Makes
Well,
me
Good. Well, I like you. I think you're really cool.
Thank you. I like you too. This has been really, really super fun today. I thoroughly enjoyed it.
I'm
Yeah.
so glad. I try to do like the most casual conversations. I'm not somebody who like comes in with like a very formal thing and I drop the cussing words all the time because
Good. I love to cuss. I think I only did once today, which is pretty good for me.
I'm so proud of you. That was my conversation with Tina Alexis Allen. You can find Tina across the internet at Tina Alexis Allen and at her website, TinaAlexisAllen.com. And be sure to pick up her new memoir, Hiding Out, a memoir of drugs, deception, and double lives, available on Amazon and Barnes & Noble, all the places where awesome books are sold, including the audio version, which is on your iTunes store and at audible.com. A Tiny Revolution is produced in part with support by Sonia Bowen and Christopher Breen, as well as 93 other incredible patrons who make this work possible. If you didn't already know, I am an independent creative, which means that I don't have any sponsorships or people around me helping produce this podcast. It's just me in my living room, living my best life. So if this podcast is helpful to you, if it's been good for your community, if you think that we need to be telling more LGBTQ-friendly stories of queer people of faith, you should support it. If you've got an extra $1 or $2 every single month, that goes a long way. If you're the kind of person who buys your coffee rather than make your coffee, if you're the kind of person like me who goes out for Taco Tuesday, then I know that you've got a couple bucks that you can spare each month to help make more queer Christian content possible. So go ahead over to patreon.com/thekevingarcia and become a sustaining member today. One cool thing that I'm starting, I was doing a daily devotional, which was incredible and fun and also incredibly unsustainable because trying to write something every single day, if I had the time for it, I would love to do that. But we're restructuring it and we're actually going to be launching a private podcast for supporters at the $7 level or above. So if you want to get a weekly dope sermon that kind of like tackles the Bible, tackles questions we have, and goes directly into your inbox when it's ready, you should check that out. It's a way for me to flex my preaching muscles and a way for you to get a little bit of church, especially if you're someone who doesn't go to church that often and doesn't really connect with scripture on the regular. Maybe this would be a good way to start reconnecting with that. Just some thoughts. And yeah, we're getting ready to launch a new Pride line with Queerly Beloved Tees. I'm very excited to partner with my friend Donnie Sherlegit with again. And I think that's everything I have to say to y'all. So go buy Tina's book. Go subscribe to my blog. Go become a Patreon supporter. Go talk to your therapist. Go talk to your friends. Share this podcast with a friend. Leave us a rating if you haven't already. Leave us a rating and let us know how we're doing. A 5-star review actually gets us in front of so many people. You have no idea. So even if you don't have cash money, honey, I know that you have a little bit of time to write a little bit of a quick review. Don't you? Don't you? Perfect. Okay. Well, I am done talking. I need to go edit this and then get to work on time because that's how we roll here in independent podcast creative land. So until next time, this has been another episode of A Tiny Revolution. My name is Kevin Garcia, and I will see you again very soon. Bye, y'all.